Trump International Hotel is there because of a contract with the General Services Administration of the United States government, and the contract has explicitly said that no elected U.S. official can benefit from that contract or that arrangement. So it's just, very flagrant if we're going to give that a pass and say, oh, well, it's not strategic. I mean, that is what Nancy Pelosi said just a few days ago. I know she's your favorite member of Congress right here in town. But she said, if he commits a crime, then we'll really have to look at impeachment. He's committing a crime every moment since he took his hand off the Bible as President of the United States. But here you have Nancy Pelosi, for her own, you can tell how the tactics work out so well. They've worked out really well. So it's a tactical reason, we're told, privately. Well, we can't pursue impeachment. Now, again, it's the conventional wisdom until people break it up and begin to substitute some more reliable wisdom. I mean, that is what she's maintaining. And for those of you who live in San Francisco, who have her as a congressperson, I'd really encourage you not only to send her letters and emails and phone calls, but consider demonstrations. She's got a district office, I'm sure. It's taxpayer funded, and it's there. And picket lines are good, leafleting is good, news conferences, all that sort of thing. It's right there in front of us. And there's no congressional district. After all, impeachment has to start in the House. There's no congressional district where it's more important to pressure a member of Congress than Nancy Pelosi's district right here. And there are always a lot of excuses. And this tactical thing, thank goodness we're not so smart, like the real smartest guys in the room, because we actually are able to elude some of these traps the Democratic Party has been in. For instance, think about, I don't know if it's the same people who thought up, America's already great, but for many months before the November election, we were told, the really winner issue is to tie the Kremlin around Trump's neck. That's really going to defeat him. And so you had people, as it turned out, in Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and Ohio, several states that had traditionally gone Democratic in presidential elections, and they're worried about their kids getting through college, they're worried about paying their mortgage, they're about paying medical bills, about receding farther and farther into debt, about their houses being underwater. You can bet what they're really worried about is Vladimir Putin. I mean, this is the mentality. This was the inside the beltway, as the cliche goes, mentality. This was the assumption that they know how to do it. And the lunch bucket issues, as they used to be called, they were set aside. But we have an opportunity to say that the law matters, the Constitution matters, that people don't like the rich guys running things. They don't like special rules for the rich guy, in this case the President of the United States, and other rules for the rest of us. So I really do want to encourage you to consider ways in which you can bring pressure to bear on Nancy Pelosi, but not only that. On Tuesday night, the City Council of Richmond voted unanimously in favor of a resolution calling for the impeachment of Donald Trump. The first city council in the country to do that, but by no means the last. There's a model resolution which they used for what was passed in Richmond that's on the impeachdonaldtrumpnow.org site. And it's written for city councils and county commissions and state legislatures. You can adapt it. You basically can put in the name, I don't know, San Francisco, City of San Francisco. So a lot of these, it's not only an end in itself, although I think it can be very effective in building pressure for impeachment. But it also helps to separate some of the wheat from the chaff, because everybody in the Bay Area who's an elected official says that Trump is awful. I mean, it's very hard to find people who don't say that. But it's going to be interesting if you go to members of the Board of Supervisors and you say, here's a resolution, will you introduce it? Will you vote for it? Will you fight for it? And you're going to find it the response is going to sort of splay in a lot of different directions. And you find out who's willing to really fight Trumpism on a lot of different levels and stick their necks out to do it. And there are always excuses, like on all sorts of other stuff, there's excuses. And one of those is, well, it's a Republican Congress. The Republicans aren't going to vote for impeachment, which is, a real contempt for the idea that's been proven time and again that when people lead, as the saying goes, leaders will follow if you drag them into following, if you pressure them. They all have elections coming up, including Republicans. There are quite a few purple districts in this country where Republicans are already getting nervous about next year. We forget historically, for instance, that in July of 1974, when the House Judiciary Committee voted on impeachment of Richard Nixon, 7 Republicans voted yes. And that's out of a committee of only 38 total, Democrats and Republicans. Those 7 Republicans voted against their own party's president. It happened then, it can happen now, if we organize effectively. And I think, as with so many other things, and I'll close on this note, because we have some time for some questions and comments. We get messages all the time, forget about it. Don't go to the meetings, don't go to the picket lines, don't do the organizing work. It's not going to matter anyway, you're not going to be on TV. Just wait until the next election and maybe, you should go and vote, and that's that. We're encouraged to be disempowered, we're encouraged to be passive. That's how the system maintains its control. And I get back to this question of how do we sustain and build our own momentum? And I think it goes back to the wisdom of the importance of community, the importance of building alternative institutions, and seeing that we're not going to get leadership from people in power. We don't even need overwhelmingly to speak truth to power, because power already knows what they're doing. Don't really have to go to Citicorp. You have to go to the CEOs on Wall Street and explain to them what they're doing. They already know it. We don't so much need to speak truth to power. I'm going to speak truth to you. We need to speak truth about power to each other. And if we can understand and speak truth to each other about power, then we can organize and really develop power for the people. What a concept. Well, I'm ready for questions. Thank you.
So what I want to ask is, we've been seeing democracy in action now this recess time. There's even a site called Yellow-Matic, and you can click on the congressional representative and you can watch people yelling at them. And this is happening all over the country right now. So what I want to know, has anybody ever raised the issue of recalling their representatives, since so many people are so upset at this point about not only the ACA, but I've also seen no wall, no ban, I've seen about Russia. They are naming various issues. I'm wondering, has anybody ever raised that as a political strategy yet? If they're so unhappy with their representative at this point, and this is people recognizing what their Republicans are doing.
Yeah, the question of, with this recess period, the President's Day week, and we've seen films of people going to town halls, which I think is a great idea, and it's very important for people to be heard, and whether there's a recall possibility. As far as I'm remembering in the Constitution, people can be impeached through corruption through Congress. Officials, not only presidents, can be impeached, judges and so forth. But it's a very long, laborious process, and I would see it as it's time to look at the midterm elections. That most effectively, the primaries are only, in some cases, scarcely a year away. And certainly the general elections are just about a year and a half away, a little more than that. So I think it's ready to get to the ground. The fear factor, I mean, as one former member of Congress told me over a cup of coffee and tea a couple of months ago, every member of Congress is terrified about being defeated next time around. That's what he told me. And we need to ramp up their fear, because usually it's, Where I live, Jared Huffman, he's not that worried. He's still a little bit worried. Nancy Pelosi's not that worried. She's a little bit worried. But we ought to amplify the fear. We ought to really pump up the volume of the fear, grounded on they're not moving in a progressive enough direction. And I think that we'll have our work cut out for us in that way. Yeah, Chris?
Hey, Norman, thanks as always. Great talk. I wonder if you could talk a little more about the synergy between social movement building and electoral work, how they, and how you envision that taking place. A number of us have talked about different ideas for national alliances. Democratic Party clearly is not the vehicle for this, even if we sometimes work with them and try to push them. But what do you see as the potential for that synergy, or what would that look like, and what might be the vehicle for that?
The question being about the potential synergy between social movements and electoral work, right? So that's just a bit. One of the best models I've ever seen is the Richmond Progressive Alliance. And if you haven't had a chance to look lately at their website, just Google Richmond Progressive Alliance. For 10 years now, people have been organizing and not differentiating particularly between electoral work and community organizing in general, and seeing it as all of a piece, that to fight the environmental racism and overall corporate domination of Chevron's refinery system in Richmond, to fight the power of the landlords and police violence and general unemployment and degradation and exploitation of low-income people's labor and so forth, that multiracial, multi-issue organizing in neighborhoods and across the city need to take place. And part of that whole effort would be elections. So it wouldn't just be one or the other. It would be seen as cross-pollinating and synergizing between the two. And there's no guarantees of results, but there's a supermajority of progressives on the Richmond City Council now. 5 out of 7 are elected by the Richmond Progressive Alliance, and 2 of them just won last November. It's ongoing, and that's how, and as I said, it's unanimous, but how the impeachment resolution passed a few nights ago. So I think it's a great model, but it's not to say that it's not a piece of cake. It's a challenge, because I think it's a culture clash in many ways. Whatever the specific sort of movement subcultures might exist in different areas, their resentments and straw arguments, perhaps real perceptions and critiques in both directions, but also barriers that are unnecessary that get in the way. I mean, when I was organizing civil disobedience against nuclear power and nuclear weapons, and we were blockading weapons trains and nuclear power plant and so forth, I just thought electoral work was for dunderheads. I just thought, why would you do that? The elections are resulting in politicians who do not do us any good. They prevaricate, they hem and haw. And for the people doing elections work, they saw us as undisciplined movement people who had no capacity to plan long-term or be strategic. And those are partly perhaps somewhat perceptions, but also oversimplify and leave out the very positives that civil disobedience campaigns, educational campaigns, movement work involves outside of elections, and vice versa. So it's sort of a cliche, but I think if people can sit down and get to the win-win place where we're going to strengthen each other's different realms of activities rather than see it as depletion. We tend to think of zero sum, and okay, who's going to carve up the pie of energy, of resources? But that's, again, back to Richmond. Obviously, it was not a zero sum. It actually was a synergy, it was a magnification. And symbolically or literally, we've got to get around a really big round table and talk and say, what are our goals here? What are our goals for the next 5 years? Who do we want to get out of office because they've shown themselves not to be progressive? What are the corporate powers, the militaristic powers in our presence, in our communities? What are the mechanisms of suppression of people being able to effectively mobilize against the landlords and the gentrification and the environmental degradation and all the rest of it? And if we're able to sit down together, then we have the opportunity to do some planning and build some democratic structures. There's also this dynamic with elections that people decide they want to run and then they look for constituencies, and that's backwards. One of the greatest pair of campaigns in urban America in our lifetimes was Harold Washington in Chicago, which came out of communities meeting and saying, we need to fight the Daley machine and what's come out of that machine. Who can represent us most effectively? And really, whatever they say, and this includes generally the progressives in Congress in the Bay Area, there's a very strong tendency of even the most progressive members of Congress to see social movements as a subset of their next election campaign. And our imperative is to, through action, show that it's not an either or, but really election campaigns should be subsets of progressive movements.
Norman, just a question about the impeachment issue. I mean, I can see the incredible potential in getting people focused around that activity. So the question is obviously the elephant in the room, Pence, and where does that go? And particularly in terms of a number of things that you've laid out, like the Democratic caucus and the Russia thing, whether the end point of that is like Pence, who all the time during the debate, or in his debate, clearly indicated his unity with the NATO position, the anti-Russian position. So I worry about this, national security state, deep state, which already seems to have some signs that they're fed up with his disruption of the global order, the Davos stuff. So just your thoughts about that conundrum, because you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. The dilemma, and just for the tape, is to try to sum it up, that impeachment, if it were successful, would give us a President Pence, that Pence is really clearly much more aligned with the national security state, quote unquote, militarism, the confrontation with Russia, along with doubting that Republicans would impeach Trump. That's the most frequent concern that people have raised, and I think quite legitimately is what about Pence? And I think the most important answers are at a few layers. One is that if the Constitution is to be a dead letter in terms of the emoluments clauses, that's a very bad precedent. It's very bad to say, well, the president's flagrantly violating the Constitution, saying it doesn't matter, but we don't want to make an issue about it because we don't like who next would be in line. Part of the particular characteristic about the violations of the emoluments clauses has to do with what we think of is a major ingredient of fascism, and that is the merger of the biggest businesses with the government. It's not to say that's unknown as a dynamic in the past, but it's being ratcheted up to a new level to say that it is not interchangeable, that essentially the businessman being the president, what's the big deal? It violates the Constitution. It makes us worried, but we're going to say we're going to, in effect, wink at it because we don't want to cause maybe another problem by getting rid of it. So I think that's a hazard. But in the more political sense, if we think through a couple of steps, well, first, like the transgender decision, it's, I think, pretty evident, as with so many other aspects, that the Pence and Sessions politics are holding sway in this administration to a large extent. It's not as though Pence and Sessions aren't already having a tremendous effect on policies involved. But in addition to that, we're needing, I think, to consider what would happen if impeachment was followed by conviction by the Senate and Trump were removed from office. What would be required in order for that to happen, which is the prerequisite before Pence would become president. If you do the math, because the House impeachment requires a majority and the Senate requires a 2/3 vote to remove the president from office after House impeachment, it would require, even if every Democrat in the House and Senate stood lock solid in their votes for impeachment and conviction, it would require about 25 Republicans in the House to vote for impeachment. And it would require 19 senators, Republican senators, to vote to remove Trump from office. So I think while nobody has a crystal ball, we can imagine what that would do to the Republican Party. To have that many Republican leaders in the House and Senate vote to get rid of Trump, and what would that do to Pence himself? Because at what point would he throw Trump overboard? I think it's fair to say it would significantly splinter the Republican Party. If Pence came into office under those circumstances, I think he and the party would be way back on their heels. And the Republican Party couldn't just say the Democrats did it, because a lot of Republicans would have done it as well. So I can't compare the options to some good next 4 years, because we ain't gonna have any good 4 years. It's not like, this scenario or not impeachment, or either one of them is gonna make us happy. I think on balance, the prospect of accepting the Trump presidency for the next 4 years is a worse option than pursuing impeachment. Yes.
It's really great to hear you tonight because I was just telling him when we were at a happy hour at my China the exact thing that you brought up, which was he asked, "What do you think about impeachment?" I said, "Well, I'm not aware that Trump committed a high crime and misdemeanor yet. Well, I'll keep an open mind. I hate him. I hate Hillary Clinton too. But you changed my mind on that in a sense because I wasn't thinking about the emoluments clause. So you were right. Like an hour later, here I am listening to you, and it's like completely what we were talking about.
I'm sorry you missed your happy hour. But
Yeah. But what I really wanted to, then you talked about fascism being a melding of the corporate and the corporate plutocracy, kind of like, almost like a secular royalty in a way. And then there's other elements that may be like bashing minorities. Maybe those are strategies for fascists to win instead. But so I'm not really clear on what fascism is because I know there are these elements. I know that like Hillary Clinton I thought was a fascist in terms of I think Medicare for All is like what we need and everyone should have one program, and that the Affordable Care Act, when you consider Citizens United and the fact that they can just hike our insurance rates by $100 a person and then donate it right to the Republican Party in the era of Citizens United, is a melding of the corporate plutocracy. And so the Affordable Care Act seems fascist to me, and I'm trying to untangle the elements of fascism.
Let me try to summarize if I could. You're raising the question of what is fascism and is the Affordable Care Act, for instance,
Is that a
fascistic?
fascist manifestation,
Well,
especially if they can donate the money
you know,
to the
there's-
Republicans?
Scholars have done so
They're
much.
mandated to pay them.
Some scholars have done so many treatises on how to define fascism, and so that's above my pay grade. But the most convincing I've seen is that there are certain elements, they don't all have to be present. Naturally, obviously, you don't have to goose step to be fascist, you know.
And is there a sliding scale?
And
Is
so
there a sliding scale?
if certain characteristics are present, then it would lead us more to saying it's a fascistic situation. But I do think on that, say, the Black Bloc causes, or street violence causes, or this craziness that happened in Berkeley a couple of weeks ago in response to the speaker that people didn't want at the UC campus. In terms of, if I understand your other question right, it was about what happens when there's a next terrorist attack in the US and how Trump might take advantage of that. I think it's always a gift. It was a big gift to President George W. Bush when 9/11 happened. Took advantage of it. Violence is something that presidents of the United States love because they understand it. Because they're in charge of the most violent organization in the history of the world, the Pentagon. They hold at their fingertips the capacity to destroy life on Earth, a nuclear arsenal. We're playing their ball game. And that's true of the police chiefs and those who rely on militarized force. And of course, the police forces now more and more are militarized, literally, with Pentagon weapons and so forth. And nonviolent organizing that's assertive can break the negative chain, I think. It's not that it's a cure-all, I think it's part of the mixture we have to